My father-in-law thought my husband's sudden passing meant I was left helpless, defenseless, and easily intimidated. For weeks after the funeral, he dropped subtle hints about taking over my estate, claiming a grieving widow couldn't possibly manage a fully paid-off property on her own. When I politely told him to step back, he decided to take matters into his own hands. At 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. He had broken into my house, flashlight in hand, fully expecting to find a terrified woman cowering in her bedroom, ready to sign whatever papers he handed her. But he made a fatal error in judgment. He thought he was dealing with a fragile victim. He had no idea about my professional background, or that within 90 seconds, he would be pinned to the floor waiting for the police. My name is Samantha, and at 29 years old, I have learned that the world often misjudges quiet confidence for fragility. For years, I worked in corporate security compliance, a career that required rigorous tactical training, situational awareness, and an unshakable nerve. It was a discipline I kept relatively low-key in my private life. When I married my husband, David, we built a warm, peaceful home together, a fully paid-off property that represented our shared hard work and future plans. But 6 months ago, my world shattered when David passed away suddenly from a heart condition. The grief was overwhelming, an aching emptiness that left me physically exhausted as I navigated the quiet hallways of our empty house alone. While I was trying to process the agonizing loss of my partner, a different kind of threat began to emerge from within David's own family. His father, Arthur, was an intensely controlling, arrogant man who had spent years looking down on me. He viewed me as a meek, soft-spoken outsider who had simply gotten lucky by marrying his successful son. Arthur operated under the outdated assumption that women were incapable of managing real assets, especially during times of tragedy. In his mind, my grief didn't warrant space or respect. It was an opening. Almost immediately after the funeral service ended, Arthur's demeanor toward me shifted from cold indifference to aggressive oversight. He started dropping by unannounced, looking around the living room as if calculating the value of every piece of furniture. He made passive-aggressive comments about how a young, grieving widow couldn't possibly handle the financial burden, maintenance, and legal complexities of keeping a large home on her own. It quickly became clear that Arthur wasn't offering genuine comfort. He was probing for weakness. He wanted control of David's estate, his life insurance payout, and most importantly, the sole title deed to our house. He genuinely believed that under enough emotional pressure, I would fold, surrender the paperwork, and let him take over everything we had built. He thought I was helpless, completely unaware that beneath my quiet mourning was a woman trained never to back down under pressure. Arthur's subtle probing quickly turned into open harassment over the following weeks. He began showing up at my front door at all hours of the day, demanding spare keys, personal financial statements, and deed transfer documents under the convenient excuse of protecting family assets. He spoke to me with a condescending tone, assuming that my quiet, calm responses meant I was slowly caving to his authority. When I sat him down, looked him dead in the eye, and told him firmly that the house was mine, the estate was settled, and I did not need or want his management, his fake concern completely evaporated. His arrogant mask slipped, revealing a bitter, spiteful anger. He raised his voice, warning me that a young woman living alone had no business holding on to a high-value property and accusing me of disrespecting David's memory by refusing family guidance. When verbal intimidation failed to sway me, Arthur shifted to a smear campaign, calling David's extended relatives to claim that grief had made me irrational, unstable, and incapable of making sound decisions. He tried to mobilize the family to pressure me into signing over power of attorney, desperate to force my hand before I could secure my footing. What Arthur failed to realize was that while he was plotting, I was taking calculated tactical precautions. Drawing from my background in security, I reinforced every exterior entry point, installed commercial-grade deadbolts, and upgraded my high-definition security camera system to cover every blind spot around the property. I also gathered all original property deeds, financial records, and legal titles, transferring them to a secure, off-site safety deposit box that only I could access. I knew Arthur's type: arrogant men who couldn't handle being told no, and I prepared for him to push the boundaries even further. He thought he was playing mind games with an easy target, unaware that I was setting up a trap for his own undoing. It was 2 a.m. when the quiet of the night shattered. A sudden, sharp crash echoed from the back of the house as glass rained down onto the kitchen floor. My security system silent alerted immediately, vibrating against my wrist and waking me in an instant. I stayed completely calm, pulling up the live camera feed on my phone. There was Arthur, flashlight in hand, stepping carefully through the shattered frame of my rear patio door. He carried a leather folder filled with fake claim documents, moving with the smug confidence of a man who believed he was about to catch a terrified widow off guard and force her compliance. I slipped out of bed silently, moving through the dark hallway with total precision and positioning myself just outside the kitchen doorway. Arthur walked through the dining room, shining his flashlight around, fully convinced I was cowering upstairs under the covers. He stepped into the hallway, mumbling under his breath about finally taking what was rightfully his. The moment he crossed the threshold, I moved. Before he could even register my presence, I stepped into his space, clamped my hand over his wrist, and forced him to drop the flashlight. Before he could react or yell, I used a swift, controlled leverage maneuver to take him to the ground. Arthur hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, gasping in shock as I pinned his arms securely behind his back and planted my knee into his shoulder blades. The arrogant man who thought he could intimidate me was suddenly completely immobilized, breathing heavily against the floorboards, unable to move a single inch. "What are you doing?" he sputtered, his voice trembling with genuine panic. I leaned down, keeping my voice cold, steady, and detached. "You broke into the wrong house, Arthur," I said quietly, holding him firmly in place while using my free hand to dial 911. He thought he was walking into a helpless target's room, but within 90 seconds, he was trapped, powerless, and facing the consequences of his own foolish decision. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the shattered glass on my back patio within 10 minutes of my call. When the 2 responding officers entered the hallway, they found Arthur still pinned securely to the floor, his face flushed red with shame and anger. As soon as I eased my grip and stepped back, Arthur scrambled to his feet, trying to adjust his jacket and regain some semblance of control. He immediately launched into a frantic, rambling narrative, telling the officers that he was just a concerned father-in-law checking on his grieving daughter-in-law, claiming he heard a noise and had to force entry to make sure I was safe. His pathetic story collapsed instantly under the weight of hard physical evidence. I calmly walked the officers over to my security console and played back the crystal-clear 4K video and audio recordings. The footage showed Arthur arriving at 2 a.m, retrieving a heavy tool from his jacket, smashing the glass door, and stepping inside while muttering about taking control of the estate. The audio captured his arrogant statements word for word, leaving no doubt about his criminal intent. The officers didn't even hesitate. They handcuffed Arthur right in my hallway and read him his rights, while he glared at me in stunned silence. He was formally booked on multiple serious charges, including felony burglary, criminal trespassing, and destruction of property. Standing in my living room as they led him away in police custody, I felt a deep sense of relief. Arthur had spent months believing he could manipulate, scare, and outsmart me, but his arrogance had walked him straight into a legal trap. The very next morning, I met with my legal team to file a formal restraining order and ensure that every single criminal charge was prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law. With no leverage left and his true character exposed, Arthur had to face the harsh legal and personal consequences of his actions. In court, presented with undeniable video evidence and a rock-solid case, he was forced to accept a plea deal. The judge handed down a strict sentence including probation, heavy financial restitution to cover the structural repairs to my home, and a permanent, legally binding protective order. If Arthur so much as comes within 500 feet of me or my property again, he faces immediate imprisonment. The legal system made sure he would never threaten my peace again. The fallout across the extended family was swift and decisive. When the police reports and camera footage circulated, the relatives Arthur had manipulated were utterly horrified. The passive-aggressive pressure and unsolicited advice stopped overnight, replaced by quiet embarrassment and distant apologies from those who had taken his side. Seeing the truth laid bare forced everyone to acknowledge what David and I had known all along. Arthur's grand crusade wasn't about family honor or protecting a widow. It was driven entirely by greed, control, and bitter entitlement. Exposed and isolated, he was left to answer for his own foolish choices. Enforcing those firm boundaries and standing my ground was an intense ordeal, but it brought a profound sense of closure and liberation. I proved to myself and to everyone watching that grief does not make a person powerless, and that quiet strength should never be mistaken for vulnerability. Protecting my home was about honoring the life David and I built together, ensuring that our sanctuary remained safe, peaceful, and entirely mine. Today, my home is a place of calm and renewal once again. I continue my work, surrounding myself with true friends and supportive people who respect my boundaries and value my independence. Standing on my back patio on a quiet evening, looking out over the yard, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride and stillness. I fought for my security, my self-respect, and my peace of mind, and I won.